Welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we will be finishing up Book 5, the second half of Book 5. And I want to begin by reminding you all of how Book 5 began. So, if you remember, there is this specification in detail, more detailed description of how it is that the many share everything in common, so that they generate or constitute a single life, which is the polis, the one soul of the many individuals, all ordered towards a single good. And Socrates begins by pointing out 450C, right? The Stephanus number 450C. He says, "It is not easy to explain, my happy fellow. It raises even more doubts than the topics we have discussed so far." So what's not easy to explain? Namely, the details of how everything is shared in common. One might, and this is the caution that he lays out on the table before giving the details, because he is pretty clear that, or it's pretty clear to him that what's going to happen is we're going to misinterpret the purpose of this description. So the purpose of this description might not be that this is something that can be literally instituted in an actual society, but it's going to provide a model, as we'll see here in a bit, which allows us to better understand our own situation and our own failures. So we're gonna get to that, but I want to finish this passage because it frames, I think, the whole chapter, so that we don't just throw the book away and say, "Oh, this is stupid. This is completely impractical. There's no way this could ever be a real way that a state could be run. Plato's dumb. There's no need to read the Republic." So I want to try to ward that off, or keep that worry at bay. So here's what the passage says. One might in fact doubt whether what we proposed is possible, and even if one granted that it is entirely so, one might still have doubts about whether it would be for the best. That, then, is why I was somewhat hesitant to bring it up. I was afraid, my dear comrade, that our argument might seem to be no more than wishful thinking. So Socrates is worried that a detailed description might ultimately lead the listener or the reader to conclude this is just so impractical, it's not worth thinking about. And so this brings us to the second half of Book 5, very bottom of page 164 of the Reeve translation. This is 472b. To sort of summarize, and then also to return to that original major thematic of Book 5, namely, how is it that the many share everything in common so as to constitute a single life? Socrates says this: "The first thing to recall, then, is that it was our inquiry into the nature of justice and injustice that brought us up to this point." And then Socrates goes on. He says, "However, if we discover the nature of justice, should we also expect the just man not to differ from justice itself in any way, but on the contrary, to have entirely the same nature it does? Or will we be satisfied if he approximates as closely as possible to it and partakes in it far more than anyone else?" And then Glaucon says, "Yeah, we'll be satisfied with that." So the idea, once again, reminding us, the reader, of this major theme of justice in the city and justice in the individual man are like analogs of each other, or they're exemplifications of the same thing, but in different domains or within different contexts, and so they're going to approximate each other and find their exemplification mirroring each other. Socrates then goes on to say, so it was in order to have a model that we were inquiring into the nature of justice itself and of the completely just man, supposing he could exist, and what he would be like if he did. And similarly, within justice and the most unjust man, we thought that by seeing how they seemed to us to stand with regard to happiness and its opposite, we would also be compelled to agree about ourselves as well, that the one who was most like them would have a fate most like theirs. But we were not doing this in order to demonstrate that it is possible for these men to exist. A very important passage of the Republic for the argument, for the dialectic. That is how to understand, how to read this part of the Republic. What you get is this description of what's happening with this conversation, a summary of the method of this dialogue, namely seek after a model of justice, both in the state, giving rise to a just polis, and thereby also shedding light on the model for a just individual life, both generating happiness, a flourishing life, whether communal or individual. And the purpose of this wasn't so much as to say whether this model could, with 100% accuracy, become enfleshed in an actual state or an actual person, but it was to allow us to come to an understanding or an evaluation of ourselves, so that we can better understand our own deficiencies. So the way that we come to understand our deficiencies is partly through understanding the distance that we have towards the ideal. When you think about what a model is it's like the perfect plan, and then the function or the use or the purpose of that plan is in trying to make something as like that as possible. So you could have a model of a building, and the reason you have that is it gives you something to sort of hold up your whatever you create, and then you can hold it up to that and evaluate it in light of that model. Provided the model is a perfect model or an ideal model, that's going to then give you better grounds, better footing for a good evaluation or a good understanding of your own situation as either just or unjust, good or not good, or what have you. And so the point, once again, is to arrive at an understanding of this model of justice, so that we can understand ourselves and how far we are or how close we are to the ideal. Okay, so that's the whole point, and which is why ethics and politics is ultimately rooted in a practical endeavor. It is a practical endeavor because it ultimately is not just pure theory. It's coming to a knowledge of this model, in this case the model of justice, but that then gives life to our own activity, so that we can better orient ourselves, make ourselves more just, or better align ourselves with that model so that we can be more just. Right? So it's rooted in this practical endeavor that is just what it means to be an agent. To have a norm is always or like a rule is to always hold what you're doing up against what you ought to be doing, or what you should be doing, or what would be ideal to do. And that's how we make our way through the world. We call this giving reasons, or thinking about the reasons for action. So we evaluate our actions, our deliberations. Should we go to college? Should we not go to college? Should we go to this college? Should we major in this field? You're always trying to think about the reasons for that, which is ultimately an attempt to come to a better ordering of your life in conformity with the ideal life, even if the ideal life is sort of so broad that it is not something that's anything you've ever encountered directly. You can still not just can, but you almost have to think that there is something like an ideal if you're going to be capable of making evaluations. So that is, I think, a purpose or the function of this book. It's to try to begin to order or begin to redirect our attention to this need for these models, which are ultimately, as we're going to see down the road, is what is known as the Platonic Forms. These models that we come to know, or we try to come to know, and the more we come to know them, the more we'll be able to make sense out of our lives as falling short of those ideals, which is thereby making it possible for us to become more united with it, right? So this is why Socrates goes on to describe the one thing that's needed in order for this just society, this just polis, to get off the ground. One of the things that has to be the case if you're ever going to have a just politics is you have to have, as he puts it, let's see, this is 473D. One of the things that needs to happen, and perhaps the most important thing that needs to come about, is that the kings, the rulers of the state, need to be philosophers. And if you don't understand what it is to be a philosopher, this is going to sound really stupid. And in the modern sense, or the normal sense of what we think of a philosopher to be, someone who holds an academic position in a philosophy department, this would probably be the worst advice you could ever give when founding a city or a state, a just state, to put academic philosophers and institutions like myself as rulers. A philosopher in Plato's sense is, we've kind of alluded to it in the very first episode of this series on the Republic, but here you get a more detailed discussion of a philosopher, and the philosopher is someone who is described as a lover of wisdom, but ultimately, as it's put in a little more detail on page 169, 475E, that the philosopher is the lover of seeing the truth, the one that loves seeing the truth. And they're likened to the lover of sounds, and the lover of tastes, and the lover of sights. But what the philosopher is ultimately is someone that's like that, but their love isn't limited to a particular one particular domain. So you can think of the person who who loves music. They just can't get enough music. They're always just wanting to listen to more, and that's because it just fulfills them so much. It's there's a whole world of music, and they want to just become immersed in that, and they almost feel like music leads them on. It's sort of like guiding their life in a way. The same thing with the person of sights. Socrates there's this point in the dialogue where you get the person who has this desire to see is like a philosopher. So when you it's kind of like almost like a curiosity in a way, but it's you just want to know what's before you. You just take enjoyment in knowing what is around the corner. And what Socrates does here is he says beauty is the object of love, but when it comes to sight lovers and sound lovers and taste lovers, they don't love beauty itself. They love particular exemplifications of beauty. The sight lover loves visual or visible beauty. The sound lover loves auditory or audible beauty, music, right? The taste lover loves beauty that is tasteable. It's something that can speak through that sense. Whereas what the philosopher is someone who doesn't just love beauty under this description or under this domain, or loves beauty only within this context, but it's the person who loves beauty as such. So one way to maybe think of it is there's this thing. It's kind of, I don't know if you really want to call it a thing, but that's known as beauty, which manifests itself through or in different mediums, we'll just say mediums, music, art. More generally, you can talk about the different types of art, but those are the different mediums by which beauty presents itself or reveals itself. But the philosopher is enamored not with any one of those, but with the beauty that lies before any of the particular manifestations of it. It's almost like, here's an analogy that may be helpful, even though it might be a little misleading. You might love your friend because of the particular actions that they do. Oh, they come over and they help me cut my grass, and they help me change my oil, and they always bring beer to the party, and these are great friends to have, and in a sense those are exemplifications or manifestations or revelations of friendship. That's how friendship is communicated or revealed or made known. But to love a friend isn't to love them only because they bring beer to the party, or only because they help you change the oil on your car. Rather, there is something which lies before. Now, it's not like in contrast to any of those other manifestations in action, but there's something that lies before any activity that your friend does that friendship is really about. So the true friend is one who seeks to love the friend as such, and not merely because of the actions. And now this is, we have a fairly common term for this, which is unconditional love, something like that, where you recognize that the love of this person isn't based on any conditions, and so it's a love that goes before any conditions need to be made or said or done, right? That is, it's this attempt to love what lies at the root of those actions and not merely those actions themselves. And that's similar to what's happening here with the philosopher. It's the person who loves truth itself or beauty itself or justice itself prior to any particular manifestation of it. So you could think of, you might know people like this. Maybe you're one of these sorts of people who loves learning. Learning what? It doesn't matter, right? This person is the person who's just so enthralled or enamored with truth, with knowledge, that it doesn't matter whether they're learning about the migration patterns of red-winged blackbirds, or whether they're learning about the different types of fungus that grow in Kansas, or the number of gallons of gas that are consumed by certain types of vehicles. You pick whatever crazy little thing you want. There are people that just can get interested in anything and everything. And what lies at the heart of that character or that disposition is they're a lover of truth as such. They're a lover of wisdom as such, not any particular area. It's not like, oh, I just love learning things about cars, but everything else I'm completely uninterested in. I don't have any time or patience for that. That would not be a philosophical spirit, even though they have a taste of what it is to be a philosopher, because they do love truth, but because it's limited like that, it's not the real philosophical spirit in the way that Socrates describes it here at the end of Book 5. And so what you have to have is someone who loves justice as such, or justice itself, as it's usually referred to in Platonic dialogues. It's that type of person, that type of lover that needs to be the rulers of cities, because of the fact that they're going to be seeking to be as united or as in conformity or uniformity with justice, the perfection of justice, this model that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, right? They're going to have a clear vision of that, or at least that's what they want. They want a clear vision of the model as such, not any particular manifestation of a city, but that model, right? And so what is happening in this book is you're getting the introduction of the philosopher as the ruler or as the king. And now that, once again, means someone who loves the form of truth, not particular truth, but the form of truth. Someone who loves justice as the model, not any particular brand of justice, but the universal, because it's then that individual is able to look at any particular situation and come to an understanding of how to best order that situation so as to make it like that ideal. Okay, so that's the way it's described, and he puts this. Socrates states this as love is always true love. Now this sounds like Princess Bride, but true love is always of the whole. It's always something that you can recognize the parts, but it's always of the whole. This is on page 167 as well, 474C, right before D. Socrates says, do I have to remind you, or do you recall, that when we say someone loves something, if the description is correct, it must be clear not just that he loves some part of it, but not another, but on the contrary, that he cherishes the whole of it. So the philosopher, namely this individual who loves something, namely loves wisdom or loves truth, loves the whole of it. And so they're the person who's going to be looking at all these particular situations, these particular things, and be seeing all of these particular things as partaking in or participating in or being an image of something else. And it's that other thing that they love. Just as when you going to another example with friendship, because I think I want to transition to this other idea at the end of Book 5. When you give a friend a gift that they cherish or they love, like a book, so you give them a book or a bouquet of flowers or something like that, and they come to cherish that, it's not so much like what gives that gift value. There's something about it having value because it's just maybe a good book. Maybe there's just beautiful flowers. The physical nature of these flowers is just such that they're beautiful. The symmetry, the color, everything is just amazing. But there's something that transcends those aspects of it, which gives it a completely different type of value. It's because all of those things, the flowers, the book, it's an icon or reminder or a physical manifestation of friendship or of love, so that whenever you see the bouquet, you don't just think of flowers, you think of your friend. Whenever you see a book, you don't just think of the book, you think of your friend who gave it to you. This is the notion of a sacramental, something that is it directs you beyond it. So a wedding ring, it's not just a piece of jewelry, because the significance or the meaning of the wedding ring it's like this is a physical manifestation in a very minuscule way, but a physical manifestation of this love of this individual, and your unity with them. And so this physical silly little piece of metal is capable of being an icon or an image of something beyond itself. And it's the one who can see and appreciate the value of a wedding ring in that way is someone who's philosophical, who can love the whole, not just look at the metal and say, oh, the metal's really pretty. That would be someone who loves only part of what's here. The one that loves the whole of what's there, the whole of the wedding ring, is the one who sees it for more than just metal, and it actually communicates something beyond metal. Namely, it communicates love, or communicates unity with your spouse, or something like that. And so it takes a philosopher, someone who can move beyond just seeing little parts of things to seeing this whole that might transcend the parts, in order to best understand how the parts are related with each other, so that there is this transcendent whole generated by them. Okay, and so this is getting sort of heavy, sort of weighty. Try to press on through. If you need to sort of slow down, pause, and reflect on this as we keep going, please do that. Don't hesitate. Okay, but I want to continue this theme, and this will bring us towards the very end, where you get a description of the relation, or a discussion, better yet, between knowledge and ignorance, and something that lies between them. And the way that I understand this part of the dialogue is that there's two two things that are going on. There's the world or the domain of things that exist, right? So you can talk about some things are, and then on the other hand, you got the complete opposite, which is some things are not, which is nothing. And now what's really paradoxical about this, when you stop to think about it, is there isn't anything that is nothing, because if it was nothing, then it wouldn't be anything, right? So there's already right off the bat there's this paradox that's underway. Okay, so but I don't want to get into that too quickly. Okay, so what you have, think about this, is you have the models that we were talking about earlier, right? These forms, justice itself, truth itself. These are the universal models, the ideals, and they don't change. There are things that change, either resemble those models more or less, right? There are some things that can be more just. There are people that can be more just than other people, but the model itself doesn't change. Think about it in terms of something. This is just an analogy, but like you have a piece of music that's written on paper, right? Like sheet music, and you could throw all the dynamics in there, and play it this way and at this tempo and what have you, and there could be 5 people that can all play that song, but some people play it better than other people do. And what that means is some of those performances of that piece are more, maybe not more, but they're closer to the ideal piece of music on the page than others. My kids are learning the violin. One of the first songs that you learn on the violin is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and some of my kids play that song more like how it should be than others. But even though some of my children aren't that good at playing it initially, they're still playing the song. It's just there's a lot of defects. There's a lot of deviation from how it ought to be. As they progress, their performance of that song gets better and better. It gets closer and closer to the ideal. So there's a type of change going on, but it's not a change in the ideal, right? The ideal, version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, that doesn't change. That's always going to be fixed, in music history. Sort of, here's how this song ought to be played, and there might be different, variations of it, but there at the very least there seem to be some that are further from that than others. Okay, so that's what I have in mind. There's there's things that don't change, these models, these ideals, and that is what Socrates talks about as the object of knowledge. So knowledge is an attempt to come to see. Once again, we're going to continue using the metaphor of seeing. Knowledge is coming to see that perfect model as it is, right? You come to see. You're not, so to speak, you don't have to be listening to any particular version of this song, but you come to have an appreciation and understanding for how the song ought to be played. Now, maybe that comes through having to listen to various, versions of the song, but what knowledge is for Socrates is it's an understanding of what makes this the ideal song, what makes this the form, the model. Okay, so that would be knowledge, is if you have that type of understanding of the model. Ignorance, the way he's using it here, would just be the complete failure to have any grasp of the model. You're completely blind, put it that way. Using the image of sight, right? The one who's just perfectly blind has no grasp of what the visual model is. The person who's deaf has no comprehension of what Twinkle Twinkle Little Star ought to sound like, because they're just entirely deaf. They don't know what that song ought to be. They're just completely out of the loop in regards to what that model, what that perfect form is. And so ignorance is something like blindness or deafness for Plato. What he says, though, is most of what happens for humans, for us, is not knowledge and it's not ignorance, because we all know that we don't fully get how everything ought to be, but also we're not completely out of the loop, right? There are these extremes, the grasp of the perfect condition of the perfect state on the one hand, and complete ignorance on the other. And he says that's not typically where we operate, where we live. That's not the world that we inhabit. We inhabit a world which is, as he puts it, an in-between state. We inhabit a world which is sort of a meshing of perfection and non-perfection, of being and not being. And I'll give you some examples of this here in a bit. But I think the image of thinking of knowledge as one extreme and perfect ignorance as the other, and then belief, as the Reeve puts it in this translation, belief is this in-between state, which is the type of understanding, if you wanted to call it that, about the things that can change, right? So you encounter, you see things that are good, but they're also not perfectly good, and therefore they're good and not good at the same time in a paradoxical way, right? So you taste something and it tastes really good, but it also strikes you that it's not perfect. Maybe it's like the best thing you've ever tasted, but you still, I don't know, perhaps know that it's not perfection itself, right? That's maybe the way to put it. You experience many good things in this world, but you also at the same time, in experiencing them, you realize they're not goodness itself, because they're fleeting, they're passing, they come and they go. They're in this world of, as Plato puts it, a little later in the dialogue, they're in the world of becoming, and so they're not perfect, even though they have a share in perfection. So they're kind of this conglomeration of these opposites, of being and not being, beauty and ugliness. He uses that example, and I think that is something that we're very familiar with, even if we haven't reflected on it. So think about your own life. You're not, perfect, but you're also not entirely evil. You're not like the incarnation of evil itself. And you have understanding, you have knowledge, but you're also fallible, and you know that you're not all-knowing. So you're kind of finding yourself living in this like in-between, as he calls it. And I think the way that he wants us to think about this in-between state is it's like it's a type of motion or a type of movement or directionality. It's like a sign. In theological terms, we would call it a sacrament, going back to this image that we said earlier, which is why I think the philosopher for Plato is the one who can understand the world that they live in, because they can see that the world they live in is this mix of these extremes, and therefore it sort of pushes you towards the model, which is the ideal. Okay, so the world you live in, the world I live in, is one in which we find ourselves the same and different. I'm the same person as I was yesterday and the day before and the day before, and the same person as I was when I was 2 years old. But I'm also a very different person. My actions reflect this difference. My habits maybe have changed. My thoughts, my views, my goals, all subject to change. So I think this is something that we just can't avoid, namely this recognition that we live a life which is subject to change, namely a life which is capable of moving. Life, another way of putting it, is a type of movement, either towards something or away from something. And I think what Plato's attempting to do in the Republic is he's trying to show that the philosopher is the one who can look at the world, see that it's a sign of something, and therefore it ought to be moving towards something, and that they're the ones that love or desire to know or desire to see what this life is moving towards, even though they might not have full knowledge of it, right? So the philosopher doesn't have to have knowledge. The philosopher is the person who wants to have knowledge, the person who wants to know that, right? And so the wise person or the philosophical person is the person who can see the world that they live in as ordered towards something beyond it, and therefore the world becomes an icon or an image. This is going to be very significant, very, very significant when we get to Book 7, which is the famous allegory of the cave, where you get this allegory of this cave with shadows, and then outside the cave is the world of the sun and the real things. And to properly understand that allegory, you really need to understand this idea that the philosopher is the one who can see the world as what it is, or for what it is, which is they can recognize it as in between, and therefore it's not really like a resting place. This is a world of movement. This is a world of change, and therefore it's a world that is meant to push us, to pull us, to unsettle us. So the world that we live in is a world that's kind of intended to be unsettling. You're not supposed to feel at rest or comfortable in a sense. Doesn't mean it's intended to make you unhappy, but just as when you God willing, get married, have children, you realize, but you're gonna die at some point. This is gonna come to an end for you at some point. This world of living this life, doing this job, living in the same house with these people. There's something wonderful, beautiful about this, but at the same time you realize, but it's fleeting, it's passing, and so there's a type of unsettling. There's an unsettling feeling, at least that I have, when I reflect on my life within this world of becoming, and it makes me want to reflect on what is the meaning of it, being in motion. What is the meaning of life being, unstable, and being in between, right? So that I think is worth thinking about, because ultimately, unless you really feel that paradox, the paradox between, or the paradox of being and not being, the paradox of our own lives, our own existence as being in this middle ground. This is also at the heart of the Christian understanding of creation out of nothing, in kind of classic metaphysical terms, you get the all these distinctions of essence and esse, or essence and existence, and act and potency, which are something like this divide, this in between of these two extremes, these two limits coming together to give rise to our very existence as sharing in, partaking in the unchangeable, being of God, but at the same time coming out of nothing. So there's part of us which shares in God, and there's another part of us which is just not God. But what's the contrary? What's the opposite of God, who's being? It seems to be not being. And so you have this tension, it seems, with the doctrine of creation ex nihilo. Not that it means it's false, it just means that the meaning of it is that it kind of gives rise, or it reveals that we live in an in-between state. And this is, I think, a point that the philosopher William Desmond has reflected on at great length. Highly recommend a lot of his work, especially Being and the Between, which is a reflection of various aspects of this phenomenon. Okay, and so I want to just sort of end with this challenge to reflect on what's the significance of coming to realize that we are unsettled, that we don't know, right? It's a paradoxical thing to come to know, come to realize, come to be aware of the fact that you don't know, to come to realize that you aren't sure. You come to recognize that you're not perfect, you're not just. But at the same time, that itself is a gift, it's a grace, it's a type of wisdom, type of truth, right? And so that very recognition of weakness is itself a sharing in goodness, a sharing in strength. And so this is the beauty, I think, of the philosopher. It's the one who can recognize this and kind of just grapple with this tension back and forth. And it's not just a meaningless tension, but it's one that ultimately is a longing, right? So the philosophical life is a life that doesn't just try to like hold on to wine and try to rest in wine, but it's the one who always wants to move beyond it, move something more, something greater than what I have. I want beauty itself, right? That's what the philosopher is seeking. So with that, we will, which is actually, we'll end with this quote. This is how book 5 ends, with this quotation from Socrates. So those who in each case are passionately devoted to the thing itself are the ones we must call not philodoxers, like lovers of belief, but philosophers, right? So the one who loves the thing itself, which I think within this context, that means like the model. That's that towards which my unease is directed, even if I don't know what that is. And that's what it means to love it. It's to say, I don't understand it, but I want to, right? It's a type of desire. That type of person who's passionately devoted to that type of life, is the one who is a philosopher, and then thereby consequently will be the one who is capable of ruling justly, or uniting the many.